Hi, today we're going to look at Microsoft SQL Server 2012's policy-based management. Policy-based management is a very useful feature within MS SQL, and it allows database administrators to go ahead and manage the entire environment in a much more easier way compared to previous methods available. The idea with policy-based management is to go ahead and set up some basic rules and checks in terms of what can be allowed or what settings can be disallowed within SQL Server. A well-based policy-based management system can go ahead and help make the life of a DBA much easier, just because it can eliminate a lot of the checks that a DBA is expected to do as part of securing an environment. Let's go ahead and look at some of the more common scenarios with policy-based management in future videos, but for the time being, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how to go ahead and configure a very basic policy-based management. And in order to do that, the first thing that we need to do, as you can see here, is open up Management Studio or Visual Studio for 2012, and you'll find policy-based management under the Management tab, under the tab Policy Management. Before we actually get into the details of policy-based management, it's important to understand some of the key concepts as far as PBM is concerned, and these are the facets, conditions, and policies. A facet is an attribute or a property of the database object. Typically, a facet could include very specific properties for that object. Say, for example, the database would have a database file, and the file would have properties like auto growth, auto shrink, file location, file size, etc. A login, on the other hand, may have attributes or properties such as a username, a server role, or a database role, or I'm sorry, not a database role, but definitely a server role, a username, maybe a password, a type of authentication, etc. So for these purposes, what you'll notice is that for different database objects, you'll have different facets available, and the facet may contain some properties relevant only specifically to that particular database object. If you look under the facet folder, you'll see that there are pretty much every database object listed here, and depending on the object, you'll see that certain properties are available and certain others are not. For example, at the database level, you can see that we've got the database properties, so we've got things like auto shrink, auto close, collation, compatibility levels, mirroring, the owner of the database, trustworthy, etc. And if you look at the schema level, you'll see that it's either got the owner or the schema ID or the object itself. Some other things that you might want to look at is the table. So as you can see, you can check if the table has a clustered index or not, if it has a trigger, if it's got fake system tables, if it's got an index. So these are common things that you want to go ahead and do from a database standpoint. Common best practices that most DBs expect from their developers is that every database table should have a clustered index. So simply creating a policy-based management check over here could go ahead and alleviate a lot of the work that a DBA would have to do in terms of being able to make sure that some minimum compliance is being met. So now that we understand what a facet is, basically, the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and use that facet to go ahead and configure or set up certain conditions or criteria that needs to be met. A condition, like its name suggests, is basically an evaluation of the property, saying that is auto shrink enabled or disabled, or does the table have an index or not. So the idea here is that you can go ahead and use some of the underlying facets to create conditions, and these conditions are what will be evaluated at the policy level. So let's go ahead and create a condition. I've already created a couple of them, so I'm just going to delete one of them and then recreate them for the time being. So here I'm going to go ahead and right click condition and then create new condition and give it a name saying auto shrink policy based management. And obviously this applies to the database options, so I'm going to go ahead and choose database option. And as you can see here under database option, I have a facet called auto shrink. Under auto shrink, I want to go ahead and evaluate auto shrink to be either true or false. So as you can see here, most of the time auto shrink property will have a true or false, because SQL Server understands that this is a property that has very predefined values, and it'll either have to evaluate to one of these values or not. Certain other facet and attributes that you have within the facet would require the DBA to actually type in the value that they expect. Sometimes things like naming convention, etc., would require user input to go ahead and configure the value. So as you can see here, auto shrink, I want to go ahead and make this false, because it's generally a best practice to have auto shrink false for user databases and true for the temp database. In this case, the policy that I'm creating is for the user databases, so I've just gone ahead and configured auto shrink equals to false, and then press OK. Now that I've done this, you'll see that I've actually got a condition created for this. So let me just go ahead and check that. So you can see here that I've got auto shrink PBM listed here. Now the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and configure a policy on the server that takes advantage of this new condition. So let me go ahead and create new auto shrink policy. And again, at the database is where this is configured, so I need to go ahead and go into database options, and there I will see auto shrink PBM. Like I mentioned earlier, the auto shrink is usually disabled or set to false for user databases, so I'm going to go ahead and just select that option from here. And again, I want to evaluate this on demand, because the main thing here is that this policy is not something that I want to run very frequently, because it's only something that needs to be checked occasionally at the database level, usually at the time of creation of the database itself. So I've gone ahead and set the evaluation mode to on demand. The next thing that you want to look at is the server restriction. Policy-based management has been available for quite some time, and as a result it needs to be backward compatible, mainly because certain features that you had previously in SQL Server are no longer available in the newer editions, and vice versa. So for that reason, you can go ahead and decide on which server or what kind of environment certain checks run, and on what other environment these checks shouldn't run. The idea being that you can go ahead and control the behavior, especially if you're using a central management server to run a set of policies on all other registered servers on that particular server. So at this moment I don't really have all of that, so I'm just going to stick with just a standard policy and on demand schedule. So press OK, and let me go ahead and just refresh this. So now that I've refreshed this, I should have the new policy listed here. So I've got new auto shrink policy, and if I right click it and choose evaluate, it'll go ahead and evaluate that condition that I've just created, that every database should have auto shrink false if it's a user database. So as you can see here, I've got my user databases, and they've all passed, as you can see here. So this is how you want to go ahead and use policy-based management to administer the server and make sure that a minimum requirement in terms of best practices or features that need to be enabled or disabled are being maintained. Obviously, policy-based management is much more powerful, and there are a lot of other options that we need to explore, which will be presented in future videos. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and hope to see you soon.